560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. This may surprise you, but I thought that Bill Clinton's speech last night was the most effective speech of the convention in terms of what the convention is trying to achieve. Okay. And I say that because his speech, I mean, once you get past the fabulism in the direction of Biden, he healed the sick and put us all back to work and the silliness. But once you get past that, his job was to, and the job of other speakers, but I think he did it most effectively, was to define Trump as an unacceptable person. He's a bad person. He says he's going to fight for you, but he isn't. And that's the big takeaway. And I think Bill Clinton's delivery, even though he's clearly feeble at the tender age of 78.
I mean, he looks awful.
But the message and the way he delivers it in sort of the reasonable tone of voice with a little bit of that Southern drawl still comes across as
genuine. I mean,
well, no.
I've never seen anybody work a room like him.
Yeah, I know that's the cliche around him.
It's
It's delivered in a way that doesn't frighten. It impresses. Right, you accept it. Okay, all right, we got this situation, but there's no need for hysteria. I mean, calming isn't quite the right word, but there's a couple of flourishes I thought that were particularly effective. Again, for their purposes. I'm not rah-rahing the speech or Bill Clinton for that matter, but you have to look at this through the sober eye of impact.
What does her opponent do with his voice? He mostly talks about himself, right? So the next time you hear him, don't count the lies. Count the eyes.
Good turn of a phrase. So is this.
He's like one of those tenors opening up before he walks out on stage like I did, trying to get his lungs open by singing me, 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 me. When Kamala Harris is president, every day will begin with you, 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 you.
It's a simple contrast, much like Trump at that Atlanta rally that I keep going back to. I wish he would develop it more. Fight, fight, fight versus fake, fake, fake. Maybe overly simplistic, but memorable. I mean, give me a line you remember from Barack Obama's speech.
Well, when he was disgusting and was making a penis joke about.
Yeah, so that's not a particularly important takeaway.
No, well, I'm just saying it was disgusting.
But that's the point. It was unmemorable. Give me something you remember from Hillary Clinton or from Michelle Obama.
Nothing.
You may remember tone, but I mean, there's nothing that framed the race in a simple way that you take away. Dan Henninger argues in the Wall Street Journal, the nonstop happy talk in Chicago, joy and so forth, meant to dispel the initial stumble of Kamala last week with her rollout of price controls and give Harris's cheery running mate a shot at retaining control of the White House. For now, Henninger writes, I'd say the party of committed left-wing progressives accomplished its two main goals, capturing Kamala Harris, inventing this narrative around her and that she adopts this persona and then you go with it, and defining Donald Trump. We'll see if Noah Rothman agrees. Noah Rothman is senior writer at National Review. He's the author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, is Henninger right that those are the goals, and they've largely been accomplished?
Yeah, I think you have to concede that they've hit the notes they want to hit because they're talking only to Democrats. Democrats and independent voting Democrats. And as we learned last night, Oprah Winfrey is an registered independent voter, and she is the perfect example of an independent voter because most independent voters are dedicated, dyed-in-the-wool partisans.
Right.
They just have, a self-conception that doesn't allow them to fully give themselves over to a tribal identity. I say that as a registered independent voter who suffers from the same narcissism. Nevertheless, I do think they hit their notes. That does not mean that Republicans are not just buried with ammunition as a result of these several days of conventions. You were talking about Barack Obama. Do you not remember what Barack Obama said? And I don't think you're going to remember more than sentiment. Most voters will take that away. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I came away with was, just a really fresh memory of why Barack Obama was a very effective communicator on the trail, but an extremely unpopular executive among the people who actually make policies that stand the test of time. He's got Obamacare. Obamacare survived, but he stumbled his way through after the legislative phase of his presidency was over in 2010. He stumbled his way through crisis after crisis at the executive level, the managerial level, because what he does on the trail doesn't work as president. What he does on the trail is this rhetorical trick where he removes himself from the political fray. He ascends to Olympian remove and criticizes everybody with his perfect information, and therefore he is above the fray. And then he can descend from 30,000 feet and engage in exactly what we were just talking about, lewd hand gestures and attacks on character, and be as bitter and partisan as possible. That works on the trail because it's disarming. It gets people to say, "Wow, he actually agrees with what I'm saying." He's making a concession to our reality. But it doesn't work as the president because you can't remove yourself from the executive branch over which you preside. It never worked for him, but he's still doing it. I mean, it's a lot like that. We have theme after theme in this convention: book bans that don't exist, and an attack on IVF, which isn't happening. No. And all this stuff is working up Democrats, but it's vapor.
And also every night we have to hear about somebody's abortion. They always, pigeonhole that in. And even Biden, I mean, his alleged primetime speech that was supposed to happen was pushed back because they had 3 different women telling their stories, and one wasn't an abortion. She had a miscarriage.
Yeah, right. If you actually dive into the details of this sort of thing, or the themes that they're retailing broadly, that's just one of them. A lot of them are based on sentiment and half-truths. For example, like the IVF thing. It's not based on nothing at all. It is based on an Alabama court which interpreted an Alabama law to be so stringent that it prohibited the fertilization of embryos at that point because those embryos would be fertilized and therefore be a person. And that the court ordered a series of orders that compelled IVF supporters or providers to cease operations temporarily while this is being appealed and working its way through the courts. So it's not based on nothing, but Democrats ran with that, had a show vote in the Senate, compelling Republicans to vote against it because this is not a thing. And they use that vote to demonstrate, Republicans hate IVF. Now, this really works, I think, with partisan Democratic voters who don't think too hard about this sort of thing. But for anybody who has an attachment to, evidentiary standards, they would like something a little bit more than that, I suspect, to establish Democrats' hostility to or Republicans' hostility to IVF, and they just haven't provided it. So they're creating a lot of smoke and flack and hoping that the press will fill in the details for them, and they will. They absolutely will. They're busily trying to allege now that we have failed Kamala Harris when it comes to the price gouging scheme. America has failed her. News analysis in the New York Times, in Axios, in Washington Post, all of them say, Harris he's been misconstrued. The context is removed here. Everybody who's saying this is a price-fixing scheme because it fixes prices, they're wrong.
Right.
But you know what? The problem here is that we just have no way to clear this up. If only Kamala Harris had some means to communicate with us directly from beyond the veil. But she
33 days.
She just lacks. No, she just has no. We'd have to break out a Ouija board to figure out what it is she's trying to say to us. And in fact, the fact that we've reached these conclusions that Kamala Harris resents is a personal moral failing on our part. we should really examine our priors that we haven't reached the conclusions that the Harris campaign wants us to internalize.
The RFK factor. So RFK looks to be dropping and going to support Trump. Exactly what rhetorical form that support takes is unknown. But what's your sense of the impact that RFK Jr. support of Trump may have in swing states? I mean, certainly the Democrats went to great lengths to keep him off the ballot in many states. So that must mean they didn't think it was a positive that he might gain ballot access. And Nicole Shanahan, on a recent podcast, his running mate, provided great detail with respect to the lengths they went to marginalize the RFK Jr. Shanahan ticket.
Yeah, so it's just a guess on my part. I mean, I don't have any special insight here without having data and polling to tell us how this is going to shake out. My instinct is that it's not going to matter very much. It will matter on the margins. Third parties only matter on the margins. And even if this third party vote, which was a protest vote anyway, throws his support to Donald Trump, that's not going to convince all the protest voters to abandon their protest. So I'm skeptical that it's going to have a very big impact. It could have an impact on the margins. And the margins do matter if we're talking about, say, a 10,000 vote distinction at the state level between one ticket and the other. That's
right.
A very small margin.
Yeah.
And that could matter.
Yeah.
And it matters in this sense that RFK Jr.'s voters are likely to be low propensity voters and who are generally unenthused about voting for one of the two parties. And that's Donald Trump's bread and butter. He needs to drive up turnout among low propensity voters, registered voters who are unlikely to vote because they don't have a voting pattern, because those are his voters. He does very well among those voters. One of the benefits that the Biden campaign and now the Harris campaign is banking on is that highly motivated, likely voters support the Democratic ticket more than the Republican ticket. So if RFK drives up that turnout, that will definitely advantage Donald Trump, but I'm skeptical that it's going to matter at all.
Well, what's he going to get in return? I mean, 'cause he wants a cabinet position, doesn't he? RFK
Maybe.
Jr.?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know what he wants. I mean, probably. I couldn't tell you what he wants. I try not to get into the head of RFK Jr. very often.
Yeah. Well, because there are parasites in there, and they'll eat your brain. Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks so much for joining us, as always. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Love to have you on, and he's joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Join Allie Beth Stuckey and the Illinois Family